Welcome to Savvy Stewardship with Tim Kiser. In today's episode, we're going to cover the parable of the dishonest or the shrewd manager. Luke chapter 16, the parable of the shrewd manager, is my absolute favorite parable. I love it so much. I just wrote a book called Savvy Stewardship. It can be found on Amazon. And I believe this parable is one that's often misinterpreted and mistaught. I can only speak from experience. When I was pastoring, I believe I taught this parable incorrectly. Specifically, I believe this parable, and I've heard this taught often, and I just repeated what I was taught. I wasn't being a very good Berean at this time in my life. I believed that this parable gave license to Christians to focus so much on earning money and stewardship that we missed some of the weightier areas that Jesus was talking about. And so I've heard business owners misquote this. I've heard pastors preach this incorrectly, and I began to feel like a disconnect in my heart around a lot of these things when I started digging deeply into the concept of stewardship. And I believe we missed it. And it's very crazy sometimes to hear business owners talk about earning money and it's great stewardship and you should charge more and all that. And there is a time when we should charge more. There's a time when we should, as employees, graciously expect higher pay and earn our value that we're bringing to the marketplace. But there's also other ways of stewardship as well. So I believe this parable has been taught incorrectly, and I'm going to do my best to shed some light on this parable today. So without further ado, let's get into this parable found in Luke 16. And I won't bury the lead. It's my contention that this parable is the primary focus of this parable. And parables typically have a meaning. We don't get 3,000 meanings out of a parable. Jesus is speaking a very specific truth to us, and it's up to us to dig deep into the parable to find out what's being said. I believe this parable is Jesus giving us permission, inviting us, encouraging us to practice radical, revolutionary, fearless generosity for one reason: to get people to heaven. I believe it's very intentional on Jesus' part that he began teaching in Luke and he was on a roll. He started talking about the cost of discipleship, the lost coin, the lost sheep, and the parable of the prodigal son. And he keeps rolling into this one and even goes farther after this one and talks about the rich man and Lazarus. So Jesus is really weaving a tapestry of points throughout this teaching. Now we're going to isolate this one, keep it in context, and read most of the verses depending on the time. But the verse 1, chapter 16, and I'm in the NIV. Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer. So in two verses of this parable, we're introduced to two people. That's all: a rich man and a steward or a manager. So the rich man would have multiple business ventures, usually hires a steward or a manager for each one of those ventures. That manager has full authority to make decisions on behalf of the rich person. And the rich man heard that his steward was wasting his possessions. And so he is come to confront it, to possibly audit the books, so to speak, and fire this guy. Now, I believe, again, going back to the parable of the lost son, the prodigal son, it's another theme there of wasting possessions, prodigal living, and it continues here. And there's a financial component to this. But here, the rich man does not fire the dishonest manager, and it's going to cost him more. But often Jesus threw curveballs and kind of little twists and turns in his parables to keep us on our toes and to teach us something and get our attention. And we don't always have to be so linear in our parable interpretation, but we need to stick to the point. And the point, again, I believe, is radical, revolutionary, fearless generosity. So he's going to fire the manager. But first he's going to, let him do some more stuff, which makes the parable even juicier. Verse 3. So again, now we can assume that in this parable that the steward was busted. He was guilty of everything he was accused of, because he did not say, hang on a second, rich man, do you have any proof of this? I need evidence, because I'm telling you, I may have made some mistakes and some judgment calls, but I've never wasted your possessions and never been dishonest. He didn't say that. He started hatching a plan of self-preservation. And his primary plan was he's going to lose his job, but his house was tied to his employment. So he's like, I'm concerned about having a place to live. So what I'm going to do is hatch this plan so that when I lose my job, people will welcome me in their houses and I'll have a place to live. He's looking to couch surf, a very temporary thing that he's trying to do here, but it was important to this guy. So again, only two people in this parable so far, the rich man and the steward. Verse 5. So he, meaning the steward, called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, how much do you owe my master? 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. Then he asked the second, how much do you owe? It says 1,000 bushels of wheat. He told him, take your bill and make it 800. So now we have two more people introduced to the parable, four people total. Rich man, steward, an olive farmer, and a wheat farmer. So our rich man in this story, in this parable, apparently was involved in some kind of future contracts. He actually purchased 900 gallons of olive oil in advance. So he gave the money. I'm sure there was some wheeling and dealing and some discounting going on. And the farmer's job is, once the olive oil crop comes in, the olives are pressed, the oil is bottled or put in barrels. He must deliver 900 gallons of olive oil to the rich man. The same with the wheat farmer. As soon as the wheat harvest comes in, he must give him 1,000 bushels of wheat. But in both cases, the steward discounted the amount in hopes that the principle of reciprocity would work. Remember, he's trying to find a place to sleep. He wants to be welcomed into their homes. So he starts with the olive oil guy and says, hey, cut your bill in half. That's a pretty good deal, right? So he was paid for 900 gallons of olive oil. Now all he has to do is deliver 450. The steward has the legal right to do this. He should be acting on behalf of the rich person as a fiduciary and giving and making decisions based on what the rich man would do, but that's not the case here. Again, he has legal right to do whatever he wants to, and this is what costs the rich man more. Instead of walking this guy out of the door when he heard about his nefarious activity, he let him continue on the job, which is ridiculous. And that's sometimes parables are ridiculous because of that, kind of get our attention. And so now he has a major discount. He's saying, yeah, I'm going to cut deep on this first one. Hopefully the olive farmer will give me a place to live. If not, I'm going to go to the second guy and a 50% discount and a 20% discount. And I'm hoping that one of them will feel an obligation to let me live with them until I can find another place to live, right? So that's what we have so far. Four people: the rich man, the steward, olive farmer, and a wheat farmer. Four people. Jesus is not involved yet. The master in this is not Jesus. The master is the rich man. Verse 8, and this is the one where I was wrong, incorrectly taught this decades ago. The master commended the dishonest manager. Verse 8, the master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of light. So verse 8 is not Jesus giving us permission to be untoward in our abilities, in our business dealings. We don't get the opportunity to overcharge people simply because we can, and use the name of Christ as an opportunity and say, well, they're Christian, of course they would do me right, and then we charge them astronomical fees that really aren't in line with value. People are like, I'm already here, I'm going to pay it. No, that's not good stewardship. I remember hearing a TV or a radio broadcast of somebody. This guy was a landlord, owned some houses, and he was like, the rents were increasing during COVID and the rent prices were growing astronomically. And he called into this radio talk show host, to another Christian guy, and it's like, hey, I'm having I'm feeling kind of odd about this. Is it okay to raise the rent? And the guy's like, yes, that's good stewardship. The market sets the rent. And I was screaming at the radio. I was like, no, the market influences the rent, but you actually have the power to set the rent or keep the rent the same. Ironically, I have a person I work with who is not a Christian, is renting from not a Christian. And we were just talking about the cost of rent going up. And he said, I've been very fortunate. For 6 years, my landlord's not raised my rent one time. And I was like, well, you probably pay your rent on time. Are you throwing massive parties? No, I'm pretty quiet. I live alone, whatever. And so that landlord decided that he was going to keep the rent the same and have somebody who actually paid him on time, took care of his property, and didn't turn it over to somebody else that may not pay the rent and may not take care of the property. But this Christian was giving advice saying it's good stewardship to raise your rent, because the more money you have, the more you can give. Well, you could give on the front end too. It's a bad interpretation of the scripture. It's a singular interpretation where it says that stewardship is only earning money when that's just one component of it. But here, the master was the rich man, commended the dishonest manager because he acted shrewdly. And he was like, oh, I thought you were incompetent, but really you were underhanded. And he was impressed with it. He kind of got one-upped by this person who worked for him. He was like, man, maybe we should have you write a business case for the Jerusalem Business School and how to get over and now Jesus starts talking in verse 9. In verse 8, he was just relaying the parable. Verse 1 through 8, relaying the parable. In verse 9, now Jesus is introduced and talking for himself. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. This is key to understanding this parable. The steward wanted a temporary lodging place. He was wasteful with his master's money by discounting it 50% and 20%, hoping that the principle of reciprocity would work and he would get temporary lodgings. Jesus is taking that same point and amplifying it to us. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Our money is not good in heaven. Our money, when we die, is no longer good for us personally. If we misspent it or unspent it and didn't contribute to gospel causes, then we're going to have very minimal fruit in heaven. But here I believe Jesus is saying, use this worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Eternal dwellings, I believe, here is heaven. This is Jesus saying, I want you to lavishly use my resources, because it all belongs to God, right? He's giving us permission, inviting us, saying, it's okay. You can do this. You can give away money, my money lavishly. You don't have to wait. And then you'll have friends for yourselves in eternal dwellings. I believe that every dollar that we've given to gospel causes that's helped people get to heaven, that when we get there, we'll hear stories from them. So if you've supported missionaries in Africa or Asia, or you've used money for a food bank or a soup kitchen or any kind of thing that's helping somebody with the gospel, that you'll know. And it could have been $1, it could have been 50 cents, it could have been $5. It doesn't have to be $1 million. It doesn't matter. God amplifies and multiplies this resources for us and wants us to participate with him in this to help people get to heaven. Let's keep going. Verse 10, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with very much. Whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. I believe this is Jesus telling us that there's a testing component when it comes to money. That we could spend it all on ourselves, and you know what? Whatever, spend it all on yourself. And there's nothing wrong with having nice cars, nice vacations, nice house. Nothing wrong with that. That's between you and God. I'm not going to get in the middle of that. That's way too complicated. Some of the stuff is local church issues too, right? So you have a pastor, you listen to your pastor, you submit there. But I'm telling you here, he's saying whoever can be trusted with very little. It's easier to give, $5 and $5 million. It's like we're trying to build up this giving muscle, this generosity muscle, that we can get into a rhythm of giving. Verse 11, so if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? I really think this is a scripture that could be talked about for a long time. Trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? See, wealth is not true riches. Money is not true riches. I believe people, getting people to heaven is the most important thing. But this wording here is trustworthy in NIV. I believe it's faithful in most other translations. Both of them are strong. Both of them can be used when I'm about ready to say it. You can just insert whatever word you want. But see, when it comes to stewardship, that there is several components. And we often seem to think it's one. It's like, oh, making money and giving money, and we forget about everything else. And that's a very myopic, short-sighted view, very unfortunate because people buy into it. But it starts with earning money. Are we trustworthy to go to work and to be the best employee possible that we can, and to command larger salaries? We can easily just barely get by, um, take it easy on the job and say, I'm waiting for God's favor and God's grace to fall in my life. I've sowed a seed and I'm waiting for this great thing to happen. Or we can roll up our sleeves, learn a new skill, and make ourselves more valuable on the job. Can we be trustworthy to be paid what we're worth? And not just, godly worth, but actually worth on the job. It's very important that we work hard and make ourselves valuable. Once you have earned money, then you can do other things with it. And until you've earned it, you don't have anything to give, right? And the more we have, the more we can give in other things as well. I don't want this to be focused just on giving, even though I think it's a large component, but I think we have to get there. We have to get there. It takes time to get there. What happens is people are told that if they just budget and you give, then your life will be miraculously changed. And to a certain extent, there will be some great things that happen, but it's way more complex than that. And this is what I'm going to do today. So first is earning. We're made in the likeness and the image of God. We're made a little lower than the angels, according to Psalm 8. Surely, with that much godly privilege, we can earn more than we're earning. If you're making $15 an hour, what would it take to make $20 an hour? I remember a long time ago, we were doing our budget and it was tight. We cut all the expenses we could cut. We were living a very austere lifestyle, in my opinion. And I was just doing a dream session one day, and I added 10% raise on my top line of my budget to see how that changed my budget. And it changed it drastically. And I was like, okay, how can I get a 10% pay raise? And I started thinking about how doing that. Now, you could just wait around and say, oh, the small guy can never get ahead, and they never get ahead. I started making a plan to get a pay raise, and it worked. And then that's when I started snowballing pay raises and doing better and finding ways to improve my on-the-job performance and actually advocating for myself to make more money. It's not greed. It's wisdom, right? But once you make money, then you can do other things with it. The next thing we normally do is spend it. And again, there's nothing wrong with having nice things. I don't believe that at all. There's nothing wrong with it. That you should. I mean, the thing is when we think we have to prove we're blessed by having nice things, when we overspend to make people think that we're blessed. And I'll give you a couple examples. I've with people in churches where they would drive only luxury automobiles because they were blessed. And, maybe they made a lot more money than I thought they did, but most people, you can get by with a decent car. You don't really need to have a car that's six figures. But people were like, oh, I'm blessed, and this proves that I'm blessed. And they'd buy houses that they really didn't need or couldn't afford. And so their lifestyle creep actually absorbed more of their money. And so I believe that we should, one, optimize our salary. Two, we should scrutinize our spending. And again, have nice things, but don't just force your way into spending money to prove to everyone around you that you're blessed. That's I can't find scriptures to support that, but you can have nice things though. It's a balance. So optimize your salary and then you scrutinize your spending. The contentment's a big thing in the body of Christ. Paul was brutal when it came to contentment in the epistles to Timothy and in the whoever wrote Hebrews. Contentment was a big deal. And it's important that we are content with our lives and not think we have to have a certain lifestyle or certain items to make us feel like we're rich. But the next thing we do, we optimize our salary, we scrutinize our spending, and we supersize our savings. I've heard pastors kind of denigrate the idea of savings accounts because they're like, you don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth where rust and moth destroy, but you store up your treasures, self treasures in heaven where it doesn't. Well, I get that. But you still need a savings account. Come on. Things are going to happen. Bad things happen to good people. Not a proverb, but it's true, right? It's going to, you have to look ahead and think, if I own this house, one day I may have to replace the roof or the siding or the whatever. You're going to need money for that in the future. You can't just say, well, I'm depending on God. I'm trusting God. That sounds super spiritual, but it's typically laziness and bad theology. God's just not going to dump money down. Oh my God, my roof was bad. Well, how long did you have it? 20 years. Well, why didn't you put aside $1,000 a year? Well, I was trusting God. Well, come on. Let's supersize your savings. You need an emergency fund. You need sinking funds to help you at car replacement and college money and vacations and clothing replacement, furniture, appliances, all kinds of things that we need to save money for. But if we're spending it all before we can get a chance to save it, we can't do it. Optimize salary, scrutinize spending, and supersize savings. How about you prioritize investing? And people don't like this. They're like, oh, well, that's silly. That's gambling. The Wall Street's corrupt. I'm telling you, we're all going to get to the point where we need money and are unable to work. Now, you know what? This growing up thing, I thought it happened a lot slower, but all of a sudden I looked around one day and I was the old guy at work. I started working when I was super young, joined the Navy when I was 18, been working pretty much full time since I was 16. And now I'm, a lot of decades in, and I'm like 10 or 12 years from retirement now. Thankfully, God worked in our hearts and we started setting aside money for the future when we weren't making much. But we started, we started prioritizing savings because we knew this day would come, and it's right around the corner now for me. And I'm telling you right now, if you are young, the longer you have to go, the easier it becomes to save and the less money you can invest. If you start later in life, the more you have to invest, the more risk you might have to take. But if you have a lot of years ahead of you, don't put it off. Don't put it off. Solomon in Proverbs says, the good man leaves an inheritance to his grandchildren, and the wealth of the sinner is laid up for the just. So we have a biblical invitation to make sure we have money set aside for our family. The truth is, no one knows when Jesus is going to return. And the whole rapture mentality can be a very short-sighted way of living where we have, we just like, oh, I'm going to get raptured out of here. And that's a terrible way of thinking, because all of a sudden now you're in your 70s and you're living off Social Security and you're wondering what happened. And then you get mad and you get angry and you blame the system or you blame whatever. And you get angry because you don't have as much money as you used to have, when all along you spent your money on silly things when you were younger, instead of saying, down the road, I'm going to need this. And I'm telling you, this is not gambling. Historically, the S&P 500 pays around 10% a year, earns about 10% a year. It's going to have bad years and big years, but it's going to level out about 10%. And that compounding interest make it work for you instead of against you. It's not just, the credit cards, but make that work for you. And if you haven't started and you're getting late in the game, it's still not too late to start. You may have to put off retirement for a few years, other things you might have to do, but I'm telling you, it's very important to prioritize investing. And this is a biblical concept. The next thing we use was downsize debt. Now, these aren't necessarily linear. I'm just talking about them, right? There's ways you could put these together in a way that makes sense. Best block, no be there, right? So if you don't have any debt and don't get into debt, that's best. because eventually we'll have a point where some people just constantly live by the idea that they're always going to have debt, and they start with credit card debt and they go to house debt and they have student loan debt, and next thing you know, they're early on in their life. By the time the light bulb comes on, they are really living behind the eight ball, so to speak. But if you are right now thinking about, hey, I don't want to live this way, now there are scriptures to talk about debt, but I do my best to be biblical and not over exaggerate what the scripture says. Yes, the scripture says that the borrower is servant to the lender. That's a legitimate scripture in the Proverbs. But that's also a proverb. That's a wisdom book. That's not necessarily a doctrine where all of a sudden you have to live, because back when that book was written, there were debtor prisons. So if you could not pay your debt, you could be put in prison to work off the debt. You don't have those anymore, right? There's a lot of things, a lot of times that the Bible talks about debt is not necessarily applicable to us as Christians, but debt is not the best way. There is a better way than debt. So if you find yourself in debt and you're like, yeah, I want to get out of debt, which I would highly encourage, I believe the best way is either the debt snowball or the debt avalanche. Both of them work. The one that works best is the one that you will do, right? We did snowball. Some people like avalanche because it's, mathematically it might make more sense to them. This isn't something I disagree with a lot of people in the Christian financial community, is like, oh, banks are all out to get you. They're not. They're just trying to make money. It's like you're trying to make money. And so it's up to us to be wise and use the products that work for us, and not use products that don't work for us. And if you have a credit card, and you can use it, use it. Just don't carry balances over, right? But do a debt snowball. You find the smallest bill and you pay on that one, and you go, and then when that one's paid off, you add that balance to the next one, and you continue to do it. But I would encourage you to downsize debt. Who knows, there might be a point in your life where God's calling you to do something outside of your regular job, and maybe the pay won't be there. I firmly believe that, and I would get some pushback from this, that most pastors shouldn't be knocking down fat salaries all the time, because that's just the lifestyle they've chosen. And so you may be called and you say, I want to do this job, but all of a sudden I'm making X, but now I'm going to make Y. Can I do it? But if you position yourselves properly, you could. And you know what? You can do that by, downsizing your debt, and you can scrutinize your spending. And if you have a savings account set up, who knows? You may have a year's worth of salary set aside, and God's like, yeah, go. And you're not working, you're not getting paid. You can do it. And so we do that. We optimize our salaries. We scrutinize our spending, supersize our savings, prioritize investing, downsize debt. And the last one is we maximize giving. Now, I believe that we should give radically, generously, and, revolutionarily, fearlessly. I believe in radical giving. Like in this parable, the parable of the dishonest steward, or the shrewd steward, how they call it, is that he was a 50% discount and a 20% discount. So now I'm not building a doctrine on a parable to say how much one should give, but I'm saying that sometimes that 10% number that a lot of people banter around is a pittance for some people. It's not nearly enough, and for some people, it's an absolute impossibility. We position ourselves so we can give, and we give according to what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 9. We give as we purpose in our heart, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loves a cheerful giver. And we can't always just start boom giving right away. If you don't take care of your family financially, you're worse than an unbeliever, according to Paul's letter to Timothy. And so there is a point where we might have to start off in a very gradual, incremental way, but you continue to give, and you exercise that muscle, and you push away the debt, and you scrutinize your spending, and there's more available. But I'm telling you, from me, I think it's worth it when you talk about having friends in heaven forever, that your sacrifice. Let's say you were deciding to do something and you're like, wow, we have like $1,000 set aside for a little vacation. And all of a sudden you bump into somebody is like, hey, we're going to go start a church where they can die for starting a church. And you're like, and you and your wife both say, wow, that's like a pretty cool opportunity. And you give your $1,000 to this people that are going to start this church in this middle of a place they could die from doing it. You don't go. That's a sacrifice. Some people might think it is, but I believe that's a sacrifice. But I'm telling you, when you have opportunities like that to give to places where are doing things that you can't do or won't do, but someone else is doing it, and you have the resources to help them, then do it. right? We make it where sometimes it's not that fun just giving to projects that are just maintenance projects. I always tease it's not fun to ever buy tires or underwear, at least for a man, right? Kind of like things you have to buy. It's not exciting. It's not like buying a new record for your record player, or people who have hobbies. It's not. It's a necessity. So sometimes churches, we're buying things or giving money to things. It's kind of like it's just paying the salaries, it's paving the parking lot, and we can put lipstick on that pig and say, oh, we're doing it for Jesus. We're striping our parking lot for Jesus so people know where to park. And we try to make it sound really good because those things are a necessity. But you tell me, and my wife and I are part of this ministry. We give to this group that's unreached, unengaged people groups. And for $300, they can start a new church. And we love giving to this ministry. We love seeing videos of people being baptized in the middle of the jungle. They just dig a hole and they baptize people, or in a 55-gallon drum or whatever. And they have to redact their faces because these people could die from what they're doing. That's super exciting given to stuff like that. So find something, right? And then you have these friends in eternal dwellings when you get to heaven. You can spend eternity talking to people. And I believe this is what this parable is talking about. You can't serve two masters, right? Can God trust us to optimize our income? Can God trust us to supersize our savings? Can he trust us to scrutinize our spending and to prioritize our investing and to downsize our debt and to give, to maximize our giving? I believe there's where the truth is that we need to find a way to have him trust us to do this. Is the answer more money? Sometimes it is. I heard somebody recently talk about that and says, oh, you don't need more money. I think sometimes you do. Let's not be dishonest. Let's not say, well, the money you have is sufficient. It's not. Sometimes it's not. And just because you give doesn't mean you're going to get more, right? That's not why we give. This whole thing works together. And so verse 13, you cannot serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. And the Pharisees who loved money heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. He said to them, you are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God knows your hearts. What people value highly is detestable in God's sight. I believe he's saying that money is detestable to God. And we hold it so closely to our hearts. We let it infiltrate our hearts. When I'm not saying you have to give it all away and live in poverty and be an ascetic. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying we have to balance ourselves and we have to be ready to be radically generous. And as God softens our heart, we can give more and more radically as we purpose in our heart. Some people have said, I heard somebody say the other day, yeah, we were giving like we thought was right. Well, that's biblical. You should give what you think is right. And you're going to fight through this. This is grace. You're going to fight through this and it's going to be okay. God trusts you and he's working in your heart. He can trust you. And so as we pursue him and seek him, I believe it opens up our hearts and we see more opportunities to give radically. And it may be a sacrifice. That's between you and God. See, I'm hesitant to even throw anything out because you'll hear that and do that. The giving is between you and God. So I encourage you to give this way. Now, how much, right? So here, the discount was 50 and 20. Again, we're not building a doctrine around this, but I'm just throwing out numbers that are biblical. John the Baptist, he said, hey, someone said, what should we do? He says, if you have two coats, give one away. Again, a 50% cut. Zacchaeus said, if I've stolen anything, I'd repay it 4 times, and I give half my goods to the poor. So the giving is radical in these areas, right? We have a tendency to minimize it. The statistics in the giving in America is like 2.5% of one's income is what's typically given according to Barna research. Now, I'll let you decide if that's good or not. I'm telling you, there was a time in my life, if I could have gave 2.5% of my income, that'd have been actual super sacrifice. Because there were times in our lives where we did not have enough money to pay the bills. And we were living hand to mouth and paycheck to paycheck. And we were sacrificing, scrutinizing, and still not making any headway. But you know what? We gave what we could give. And we did it with joy, and we did it without compulsion, and we didn't feel like we're getting our arm twisted by somebody. That's not giving. That's being forced. That's legalism, not grace, right? So there you go. The parable of the shrewd manager. Luke 16, verses 1 through 15. This is the cornerstone element of my new book, Savvy Stewardship. So if you're interested in that, you can find it on Amazon. And I believe that this is paramount and crucial for us to understand that that Jesus is giving us encouragement, inspiring us, and inviting us to give his money away lavishly and saying it's going to be okay. And we need to get there step by step. If you're not there, no shame, no harm. Just continue to move forward in it and give what you can and crowd out some of the other areas. Find areas that really move your heart when it comes to giving. It may be a soup kitchen, it may be emergency shelter, it may be missionary work, a lot of things that move people's hearts differently. Find one that moves your heart and give to it joyfully. I hope this has helped somebody today. If you're on YouTube and it has, please like, subscribe, share. If you're on the podcast, still please give it a 5-star rating. And we will be back soon with another episode talking about money, doing it biblically. And until then, I dare you to profit so you can practice and promote radical, revolutionary, fearless generosity. Blessings.